welcome everyone. If you don't mind making your way to your seats, we much appreciate it. We just have a short presentation for you that includes some interaction, so we're hoping you'll join in on that. And we do have some folks that are joining virtually, so we'll be doing our best to bridge between those two worlds. So with that, my name is Zoe Mueller. I'm the project manager for this effort supporting the town, and I'm a planner by training. Grew up in the area, and I'm excited to work with you all and understand from you the aspects of your town center that you feel are most important, that we want to make sure are reflected in the planning work and in the zoning going forward. So with that, it's not just me, we have a bigger team here. So Matthew, just behind me, Sharan, Tommaso, Teddy, Carlos, and Mark, they're all helping kind of behind the scenes in different ways. So we have a really broad range of expertise to kind of make sure that we're getting you what you need. What we're hoping to do today is to give you a foundational understanding of this process, this plan, the goals that we have sort of over the course of this process, and to give you kind of a foundation in what form-based code is, what it means, what it can offer you and your town center. And then we really want to reflect to you, what we have observed and from our analysis, some of the patterns that are defining sort of different parts of your town center currently and the residential neighborhoods surrounding it. And we want to get your feedback on that. We want to understand, are we getting it right? Are we missing things? So that we can use that to build towards the next step, which will be starting to make recommendations. So nothing you hear tonight will be a recommendation. This is all just our observations, and we're looking to make sure that we're getting it right before we go to the next step. So some of the things that are involved are validating the boundaries that we're talking about of like where the pattern shifts between, maybe a smaller scale to a larger scale, a commercial pattern to a residential pattern, just understanding where those boundaries are, and then understanding, within those patterns of development, what you like and what you maybe don't like and want to see change over time. So just to kind of give you a sense of the format, we're going to be talking with you a little bit in this setting with some live polling that I'll go through in just a moment. And then we're going to break about halfway through and we're going to close out the virtual session. And instead we're going to have those of you who are in person join us in the rear of the room. We have a series of boards that will enable us to have more informal conversations and answer questions and talk through things with you in a more flexible way. So if you're feeling antsy by the end of the presentation, don't worry, there'll be an opportunity to have that kind of interaction. And for those of you that are joining virtually, please feel free to drop questions that you may have for us in the Q&A. We'll do our best to respond to any simple ones as we go. And then we will, anything that's more complex, we'll work to sort of put those responses on the website so that you can refer to them later. Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask you all to either use your cameras to scan this QR code or to go to slido.com and enter in these digits that you see here. This will enable you all to participate in live polling that we can then all look at together on the screen during the meeting. We found this is a really helpful way for people to understand kind of opinions in the room. If you don't have a phone with you that can do this is not the only way to provide input. We'll have conversations as the second part of the meeting. So we'll be happy to have those follow-up conversations with you to make sure that we're capturing all of your thoughts on this. Internet access, okay, yes, this is a good point. One moment, let me, Koa, do we have a...
Yeah, so Hamilton, one of the guests is the Wi-Fi, and the password for it is school days. There's an uppercase S in school and an uppercase D in days. So school days for Hamilton, one of the guests.
Okay, say school days, SC.
Everybody got that? So you're not... So let's go to... So I'm going to take it step by step. So everybody who's looking to connect to Wi-Fi, go ahead and look at the different network options that you have, and look for Hamilton Wenham Guest, HW Guest. Okay. feeling good about that step? Okay. Next step is once you're there, the password for that network is school days, capital S, capital D. And maybe if you want to just give me a thumbs up if you've got it connected.
Same question that we asked for people that don't have phones or they're there for this phone.
The input, so all of the questions that we're asking you here, we do also have a survey out that has a huge amount of overlap with the questions we're asking here tonight. So we encourage you all to take that survey as well and to share that with people who maybe did not come tonight. And like I mentioned, in addition to that, we'll have some time, the second half of the meeting will be conversational, so please do approach us if there's something you feel like hasn't come across in this first part. I'm seeing a couple of thumbs ups. Okay. All right, anybody who is not able to connect, please come find me after, and I'll make sure that we're capturing anything that we missed in this first part. I know that this is kind of cumbersome, but it's kind of, when we have a large group like this, it's one of the best ways that we can get a quick pulse and people can really see each other's opinions in the time that we have. All right. Let me give a few more moments here. All right. Put him an email? I don't think you don't have to. Okay. I'm going to jump to the next one. So this is just going to give everybody a feel for how this works. Got it. I just had it explained to me that the prompt about your email is not related to Slido. It's not related to us taking your email. It's about the school internet access. So it's a prompt to make sure that you're getting into the school internet. So those of you who are in, you should see this on your phone. And what we're wondering here is what your relationship is to Hamilton. Just kind of who's in the room today. So Hamilton resident, Hamilton business owner, Hamilton property owner or landlord, worker, or other community member. So if you're from Wenham, feel free to just check other community member. You're welcome here. We just want to understand kind of who's in the room. And you can check all that apply if more than one of these is true for you. All right, looks like we've got 36, 37 people that have submitted. We're getting up there. I'm going to give a few more moments for folks to respond, and then I'll reflect it back to you. Appreciate you bearing with us on this. I know it can be a little cumbersome, but we found it very helpful. All right, I'm seeing a slowing of the responses, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out, and we'll see, who we have in the room. And this will keep updating as people submit. It looks like, and this isn't surprising, we have mostly Hamilton residents. 98% of people who are here who responded are Hamilton residents. We have a lot of people who are property owners and or landlords, and then to a lesser degree, workers, business owners, and other community members. So appreciate you all bearing with us on that. Hopefully now you kind of have a feel for it. We'll come back to this when we get into the analysis of the patterns that we've observed in your community so far. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matthew to walk you through some of the key pieces that we feel like are important for you to understand before we get into the discussion later on.
Thank you, Zoe. And just a quick thank you for all of you for coming out tonight on a nice summer evening when you could be doing something like sitting in your back porch. We really, really appreciate your input, and it will make this effort and the results that much better. So we've had some introductions. We'll talk a little bit about sort of orienting you to the plan that we're working on, and then a little bit more detail about the various zoning approaches that we're considering and how they might fit relative to your goals. And then we will be doing a sort of a trial run. You guys have seen some of the images in the back, but we'll be asking your specific feedback about how we're observing the patterns that we're seeing in various different parts of your downtown. This whole effort, I think, has been emerging over the last couple of years. The planning board has, for a little while, had a goal to develop a form-based code for the downtown to more accurately reflect the built environment there, and for other reasons as well, which is to develop a little additional economic vibrancy, to encourage more residents, more businesses. That brings not just vibrancy, but in some cases a diversification of the tax base, and consequently sort of economic support for the town more generally. And then another important piece that was also identified in your housing production plan, which was, I think, a general agreement that there was a desire to find ways to create more diverse forms of housing. More affordable housing, smaller types of housing, either for people who are aging and want to stay in the town, or younger people who wanted to live here and be able to afford it. So that was one of the other objectives. A form-based code, as we'll talk about, is a very good tool to address a kind of rich and existing and sort of complex settled pattern like your downtown.
Sorry.
I think we'll wait till the end, if that's okay. We will have a lot of time back there to have good, long conversations. I think we want to keep the flow here, if that's all right.
You don't all hear it back here. Right, hard to hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, my point is, if you're doing back there, is it like one-on-one?
It'll be one-on-one. We'll all be back there.
I want the same answers.
Well, let's proceed through this, and if people want to gather together in the back, then I think that we can make that happen. There are, it should be, as many of you know, there are some issues, some complicated issues that are related to this effort, right? You know that there are plans or not plans for the Winthrop school site that may or may not bear on what's happening generally in the town. It's an important issue. And then, as many of you know, there is this state requirement called MBTA Communities 3A. And it's a law that requires communities like Hamilton that are served by public transportation to create a zoning district that allows a certain amount of multifamily units. We are going to try to, for as long as we can, keep some of these issues a little bit separate so that we can start this process by focusing on the thing around which there seems to be some interest and consensus, which is to develop a form-based code and a strategy specifically for the downtown. That strategy, it's possible that could assist in compliance with 3A. It's too early to tell whether that will actually work. I can tell you that the downtown itself, just standing by itself, probably will not suffice to satisfy the requirements of 3A, but I think we've agreed on a path here to prioritize the form-based code, prioritize our goals here for downtown, and then explore how it might relate to 3A.
You use the word form-based code, so I don't know what to mean.
I will explain what form-based code is. Thank you. Our study area is approximately the area which is about a half-mile radius around the commuter rail station. It's not a super hard line, but you know, if we want to start somewhere, it's a kind of a measure of an approximate 10-minute walk. It's a kind of useful measure for you know, environments that are walkable. Again, it's not a hard, fast sort of boundary, and we will probably be refining the boundary to something much smaller than this to fit within what we think is an appropriate area to be focusing on. And I will say that if the town puts forward a zoning code that also can comply with 3A, the town will be considering sites outside of the town center to achieve that. The town center is probably not big enough to sort of bear all the burden of that legislation and the amount of units. There are 2 sites that are under consideration. They have not been looked at in great detail, but one is the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary campus, which already has a number of apartments there, which could be sort of counted. The other is the town-owned land on Chabaco Road, which was identified in the housing production plan as a possible place for the future development of housing. So those are a couple of the remote places that might be considered for a 3A compliance. Tonight we will be focusing on the downtown specifically.
Say that again, sorry. You say that even if we went a half mile, that we would not be in compliance with the state mandate?
The state, the 3A law allows some of your district to be beyond a half mile from the commuter station.
And if we limited it to 1/2 mile, we still would not be in compliance, is that correct?
What I'm saying is that if you try to cram it all within that 1/2 mile,
Right. It's a requirement.
I think it's not a requirement to all be within the 1/2 mile, because only 20% of your district needs to be within the 1/2 mile. Other portions can be more remote. What I'm saying is that if the town wanted to squeeze it all within the downtown, I think we would find it difficult.
Okay.
And so
What all the questions?
I'm clarifying as we're moving along.
I'm also a little confused because when we voted at town meeting to approve the funding of this exercise, I thought that we voted for the form-based code development, which I support personally. But it sounds like we're actually also working on complying to an MBTA, which is the MBTA law, which is something that the town may or may not want to do. So why are we spending the money to adapt before we vote?
That is our scope. We're proceeding with these things a little bit in parallel here. I'll answer like a couple more questions. I don't want to get completely derailed on this issue, but I sense that it's important to people. There's a lot of information about these questions on the website, so I'll just direct it there, but I will say just in summary that is the plan, is that the town needs to explore the possibility of at least one 3A compliant zoning. Our parallel and related effort is to look very carefully at potential form-based code for the downtown, and to see what we want there just in and of itself, and then see how that may or may not contribute to a 3A compliant zone.
I heard you said the town needs to show at least one. You said, can you repeat that part? You said, what's the town need to show?
It is the town's intention to explore at least one possibility for complying with the 3A law.
Is the town intention meaning good intention?
I'm not going to say whether it's a good
The town
intention or not.
council has, oh, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to understand.
Can I ask a question? So, is there any representative of the town?
There are.
Can you repeat the questions, please?
Yeah.
all about?
I wanted to answer a few questions just because it was clear that it was a concern and a little bit of a stumbling block. But I would like to proceed. Purpose of tonight's meeting is to focus on the potential for a form-based code downtown and start there with something that we hope people can get behind. And again, its relationship to a potentially 3A compliant, broader zoning, that will be determined in the future.
Did you
Get
say
the
that
slide about that,
staff
because I
and
feel like.
I'm just giving, we needed to acknowledge that it was part of what we're doing. We have, this is our schedule here. We have, we're right here at number 1, public visioning workshop. We will be meeting again, I hope, with the general public for a code development workshop. So we will be taking some of the feedback that we received tonight and developing ideas that will run by you again about what sorts of things you would like to see in the code. And then subsequent to that, we will be working on sort of refining that. And iterations of that, I think, will be available as we move along for public comment. Okay. Let me start with where we are with the current zoning in the town center. The current zoning in the town center is quite simple. There's literally only pretty much 2 districts. You have the business district, which is characterized by this purple color, and then the 1A residential district, which doesn't seem to distinguish between higher density residential and lower density residential. And it's quite restrictive. And I think the important thing to look at is that in the residential district, you can't do anything until you have a 20,000 square foot lot. And I think as a result of this, a lot of projects, small additions, things like that, have to come in for special permits or variances or other sorts of special approvals. And in fact, every parcel that you see here in red is a kind of what we call already non-conforming to the current zoning. So I think regardless of what the future zoning looks like, I think there's a very good argument to be made that a form-based code can more accurately and usefully reflect what's there and reflect maybe a finer grained understanding of what the town would like to see in its town center. Okay, so the gentleman asked about what a form-based code is. A form-based code is a type of zoning code that focuses primarily, as its name suggests, on the form of buildings, their relationship to the street, their relationship to other buildings, and relies a little bit less on abstract numerical metrics, such as floor area ratio or lot coverage or things like that. It is a very useful tool, particularly in a traditional village setting where you want to be more prescriptive about the shaping of buildings to ensure that their character and scale and their relationship to the street and to their neighbors is more consistent. And so that's why it's been sort of recommended for Hamilton. I think the best way for me to sort of show you a little bit how it works is to show you a form-based code example of one that we developed for Littleton, Massachusetts, which is, it's not, Littleton is not Hamilton, but I think it's a useful example to show how the town identified what sorts of forms they thought were characteristic and how they wanted to control them. In that case, it's a fairly rural environment. There's a fondness for this, what we call the aggregated barn and house typology, where different volumes are sort of in a nice aesthetic fashion are sort of assembled together. This was a kind of building typology and approach to building that they felt was reflective of the character of their town and their sort of agrarian roots. And so the form-based code sort of builds on that logic, which is it allows for a certain size of what we call a primary massing, and then it identifies ways in which those sorts of building elements can be combined. And so even when you get to a sort of a larger building, the code is requiring you to break it down into elements of a certain scale that are really more reflective of the environment. And it's really like a kind of a rule set, right? So you start with the main volume, and then there's just a series of elements that get identified that can be added. It's a particularly strong way of preventing just one enormous box from taking place and forcing development to adopt a more finer grained sort of touch, if you will.
Setback, height limitations, volume, like how are those variables determined? And then how do the developers, like, how does that work? How do they approach the problem? If they have a site that they want to develop, I'm trying to understand what their limitations are, and how form-based code applies limitations to them.
So that's a good question. There are many limitations that are similar to a conventional code. So yes, we will have setbacks. Oftentimes you will have a maximum and a minimum setback, right? To prevent, for instance, a building from arbitrarily being all the way to the back of its lot, right? To ensure that it might align with its neighbors. You have height limits, the same as you do. You might be more prescriptive, though, about how that height is achieved, the shape of the roof, how dormers are arranged. The other thing that form-based code is very strong in is how things are arranged in a site. So typically a form-based code will prohibit people from parking in their front yard, right? So many of those parameters are still in place. It's just that the rule set and sort of the form-based code part of it is a little bit more prescriptive about how the volumes are shaped.
There are like some parameters that are written down, there's specific calculations that the developers will need to adhere to for any given model.
Completely.
Okay.
Completely. And here's an example. This hasn't been built yet, but this is a proposal that is conforming to the Littleton form-based code that we developed. And you'll see that it's mostly a commercial shopping center, but the buildings are not a big fat block that's at the back of the site with parking in front, but it's arranged towards the front of the street. There's an emphasis, as you can see, on promoting a kind of walkable and pleasant sidewalk. The developer was, in a sense, took this rule set and it created something that felt a little bit more village-like than what they might do if they were just simply allowed to build a shopping center. There's a big emphasis you'll see, for instance, the parking is at the rear. There are provisions for being able to walk through the site, again, promoting those aspects that feel more like a village and less like a shopping center. Yes?
Just wondering if this presentation is going to be available on the website of the company?
Yes, I think so. Does anyone have any questions of form-based code before I, yes?
I'm sure you understand that Hamilton is a separate community, we don't have the same thing. And Title V precludes all the zoning issues that we're talking about here. So the setbacks, the separation of groundwater, 100% reserve requirement. The reason all the buildings showed up as red and non-conforming is because none of them conform to the sanitary sewer codes that currently exist. I'm curious to know how that Title V will jump ahead, I assume it will jump ahead, with form-based zoning proposal.
So again, there are more answers to this. I'll restate the question. Okay, so there's a question about the relationship between septic requirements, Title V, and potential conflicts between those limitations and what zoning might allow. So those requirements don't go away. It's possible that zoning may allow something that is not possible for those reasons. And the two are, in a sense, separate. Zoning is a little bit the vision, the ideal picture, But any proposed project would have to go through all those requirements. Above a certain size, they need to meet the requirements of site plan review, they need to meet Title V requirements. There may be cases where on a particular site, because it's too small, they can't. But it's,
But maybe all this form-based zoning is somewhat irrelevant unless you somehow regulate the secondary issue. Because it's throughout the downtown, it's every person who lives downtown knows the implications of having a Title V. And Title V jumps ahead to zoning.
I think there's consensus that as a first step, the town wants to see better zoning in the district, and right now, the zoning doesn't really allow practically anything. And I think what a form-based code can do is provide a more granular and fine-grained approach that allows people to develop incrementally, to develop things that are small, to do additions that are sensitive to their neighbors, and to work out the septics and those other things in parallel. But I disagree that it will be completely impossible everywhere. I think you need to set the vision of what you want through the zoning. And yes, there will be challenges, but you may have, you may have septic someday, you may have sewer, you may have, these things can change.
Is that part of your exercise is to figure that downtown?
No, it's not. It's not part of this plan.
Are you going to be, this is wonderful, are you going to show us something, it's not that half-mile radius, the conversation on the half-mile radius is specifically default free, I'm not saying there's no business district looking at it as well. So the business is really looking at it, wonderful. But what are we looking at, and what are the rules we have to apply for residential property, inside of that half-mile zone? That's really the question.
Yeah, we are at the extremely beginning of this process. We have not developed those rules. We are right now, with your help and insight, we are trying to establish what the patterns are of the downtown, what are the things that we want to continue to preserve, where we may want to change and grow at a much finer grain.
I understand, I appreciate that, yes. I'm trying to understand. We're looking at a plan here for retail in Littleton. We're talking about creating facilities here, town, structure, I'm sure not trying to not every interesting in that town. There's seven issues there. And once we, if we do in fact go down this road to applying for 3A, we see a lot of our zoning through the state of Massachusetts. That's a fact. The question for today is, well, that's great. All right, so you're going to show us a plan or an idea, you're going to talk to us about what this is going to look like, what this would look like. Is there something else you're going to show us? Or is this...
This is not, I am not saying this is what Hamilton should look like. This is an example of how form-based codes can incentivize or control certain outcomes.
Beautiful retail.
For how it more closely can control development in forms that are, let's say, acceptable to the town at large.
From aesthetic.
Yes.
But again, from a residential question,
Can you show us what 15 units are able to
No, this is, I would like to continue this effort. We are not here to talk just about 3A. Our primary mission first in this effort, we've been through a lot of conversations around this, is to actually begin to look at what the form-based zoning can do for downtown Hamilton. It may not feed into a 3A compliance scenario, but we need to start somewhere. From what I understand, there is consensus around crafting a better zoning code for downtown. Let's start there. We are not into units per acre yet. We're not into any of those parameters yet.
Again, I asked the same question, I made the same recommendation, let's read out a conversation, and you had to tell us that it was part of your.
I need to acknowledge that it's out there. It would be, I need to acknowledge that it's in the room, so to
It's
speak.
confusing for us as residents to hear, you have to tell us that part of your scope is to study 3A, but we're not gonna talk about 3A.
Not tonight.
It's confusing, it's a lot.
Yep.
I think the point though is any residential development would also have to follow form-based code. It is an example of form-based code.
Correct.
I think that seems aesthetically what residential development would
Form-based code would regulate the volumes, the mass, the things that make up the aesthetic of a building for any type of use.
And
Where-
where's an example of 15 units per 1 acre? You must have an example of that.
I don't have an example because that was not the focus of our show tonight.
What if the form-based makes sense, forget about that. When you have a residential area or downtown area that's already private, established as private ownership, how do you say everything that's form-based zoning? How do you grandfather, or is it somebody get sell their property and you have to follow the code and redo everything?
Yeah, so the question is about how this vision, let's say, that's embodied in form-based code gets implemented, and what happens to properties that were being developed under the different code. There are different ways to implement a new code. One is as an overlay, so the form-based code would come in, and you could choose which code you want. The other is to replace the existing code, it's too early to tell which is going to work better, but a lot of properties are already, again, 70% of the properties in that area are already what we call existing non-conforming.
20% of the residential farms.
They're mostly residential.
So residential,
We recommend form-based code of properties to remain non-conforming. The owners of the property do not need to modify their property.
No. There's no.
You say that in the microphone.
Yes. So now, if there's a new code, it's not like everyone suddenly is forced to go out and change their dwelling. Not at all. And in fact, a new code might bring a lot of, in fact, most of those properties to a place where they might actually be conforming.
So I appreciate how you acknowledge that there are non-meeting steps in the process. My question is on the first step. The first step is being super important. But there's a set of goals established that usually get set as part of the first reading session. Recognizing the town's approved $125,000 for the effort and the housing development. HCC's picked in 25. The majority of goals in the read was the HCC alignment in their goals. A minority of the effort. So I guess I wondered if there's an opportunity to address the original set of goals that we established without input from the visiting session. It would be helpful, I think, for us to all have input on what the goal of development is
I think
before participating in developing it.
there's a question about what the goals and the vision are. I think the goals of the plan are to implement a form-based code for the downtown, in parallel exploring 3A compliance, but those goals for the downtown, those have been discussed through, the planning board has discussed those things. There was a desire to do that.
We did discuss the goals. I'm sorry.
That's how they've been identified. In terms of how those goals, the goals of developing a code, the vision, right? What you want to see in your downtown, that's what we determine through this process. That is not predetermined. So, the current business owners, everyone is invited to participate. There are numerous.
My question, has anyone, I know you do input, you don't do outreach, but has anyone done outreach to the current business community in Hamilton to see how they feel about all the problems that would happen on Windrows? Because I can't imagine that multi-generational
not sure they've been reached out to specifically, but there have been open channels for input.
Sorry, I just have to clarify, in order for the people who are participating virtually to understand what's happening, we have to restate the question. This is also not an intentional Q&A. We're trying to be responsive to the clear frustration and people wanting to have clear answers to this, so we're adapting to that. But in order to do that, we need to pause, let us restate the question so everybody can hear it. We're not going to start bringing the microphone out into the crowd, because we really need to get to the point where we're getting input on the actual patterns of your downtown, so that we can have something to work with that's not just from our brains. So with that, if you don't mind restating the question, and then we'll keep going.
My bad, I haven't been restating the question. The question was, have we reached out to the business owners in downtown? I don't know if we've reached out to them specifically. There are numerous avenues to get input, polls, correspondence, attendance at these meetings. I think, of course, it's important to them. Part of why we're meeting is to understand what's important to all of you in the various parts of your downtown. And you'll see that we've sort of identified Railroad Avenue as a special place with its own needs and concerns.
All these questions that are out there, I have one question. Mrs. Hamilton goes next April. Then has to go in November. And you don't even have anything for us. And we're in the same thing because it also is tied with the upper school involved in one month of Hamilton and
The question is, Wenham is about to vote this fall, November. Hamilton is scheduled to vote next spring. The question is, why don't we have anything ready? The reason is because the town realized that this was going to be a difficult process, and they elected to take more time to do a better job, to do a more thorough job of building something that people could understand and contribute to.
so there's nothing to understand, and between now and summer vacations, and November comes, and the next town has to vote on it. You don't even have, you can't even show what 15 units in 1 acre is.
I'm going to move on, if I may. One more question?
No, this is a comment I'm going to make. What you're missing is the context here. The town actually is taking control here. It has deliberately decided not to comply with 3A. We're supposed to have a law in force by December 31st of this year. The town officials decided not to do that because one, did not want this forced down our throat unless and until people understood what the impact was, and then they could make an informed decision about whether they wanted to accept it or not. It's not a done deal. The voters will decide what they want. So, and the same thing is true of if this form-based code comes to a conclusion, it has to go to town meeting for approval. So none of this is being forced down anybody's throat. It's a process to explore what are the benefits of this to the town, and if and when 3A occurs, how it might control that portion of development. But none of this is a given. And so I think that's important. The context here, you all have control at the voting booth to accept any and all of this. So please keep that in mind. We're just starting the process to explore options for future zoning. And that's it.
I'm going to keep proceeding. You all have many, many, many questions. I just want to say that we will have a lot of time after this to answer this and spend more time and maybe answer your questions more thoughtfully. No. No, we are not contracted with Wenham.
Sorry, I apologize. I'll shut up from the this seems like such a useless hear you. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'll probably leave it after this because this seems like such a useless exercise to me, and I'm giving up a baseball game for my son right now to sit here. I think that what for a lot of us is frustrating is the fact that there's these two things, the form-based code and 3A. And like somebody just said, I think Eric Mitchell just told us that we're trying to explore, but somebody else rightly said, what are we exploring? We have not decided whether we want to comply or not. Why don't you let the people decide first and then spend the money where the people want to spend it? That's kind of my take of this. I think this is a really, really well planned program.
I would still like to do the presentation. Thank you.
I'm going to proceed with the presentation. Okay, form-based code. These are some of the primary elements that a form-based code would control: the maximum footprint, let's say, the heights of the building, the form of the roof. And if we look in sort of more detail, the other thing that a form-based code does very well is sort of shaping the building. Again, footprint, height, how stories are defined, how the building is placed on a site. So this is back to the question of setbacks, the separation of other buildings, and then what we call site standards. So open space, how parking is treated, curb cuts, all those things. This is a lot more detail than a conventional code and a lot more guidance typically than a conventional code gives you. I have to show this funny comparison here. These are both buildings that house about 3 or 4 units. The one on the right is clearly not being controlled by a form-based code. You'll see that it has sort of a blank, boxy front. The parking sort of dominates the front yard. The house on the left was probably not constructed by a form-based code, but a form-based code could get you much closer to that result on the left than it would on the right. Again, because it has tools to incentivize and govern the shape of the building, how the massing relates to its front yard and to its context, where the front doors are located, those sorts of things. And in fact, these are other examples in different towns nearby that are housing 3 or more units. Again, I don't think any of these were sort of conforming to a form-based code, but they exhibit sort of qualities that a form-based code could control in terms of their appearance in ways that would allow these structures to be much more compatible, let's say, with single-family houses or two-family houses or whatever the context is.
Do you have an example of 1 acre, let's say within the half mile, and 15, share with us?
Let me keep going, if I may. Okay, what we want to do, I'll back up a little bit. A form-based code doesn't come out of thin air, right? It shouldn't. You shouldn't just randomly decide what the setbacks are, how buildings should be shaped or looked. A form-based code is best when it is responding to existing patterns of a particular place. A form-based code is very good at having sub-districts, right? Currently, this area only has two zoning districts in it. A form-based code is very good at calibrating sub-districts and making things much more carefully aligned with their context. In order to do that, what we want to engage you on today is whether we are seeing those patterns correctly. We've done our own initial analysis, we've looked very carefully, which you have, we've documented things. And we have, as a first step in this conversation, we have sort of identified areas that we think have their own sort of existing sort of pattern. For instance, the Crossroads in Cumberland Farms is very clearly a commercial area that is dominated by sort of its parking. It has a certain sort of shopping mall character, if you will. Railroad Ave, by contrast, which is shown here in the pink, is a different kind of commercial center, right? More like a sort of a dense, old-school village center. The yellow area, which we're calling the sort of downtown residential, is characterized by smaller lot residential developments and accessory buildings. The purple area we're calling the Willow Street Industrial. It's characterized by some of the sort of industrial or heavy commercial uses that occur there. And then another one we're calling the Bay Road Commercial, where you see a slightly different kind of pattern of older residential buildings that have been sort of converted or adapted to commercial use. And finally, the Winthrop School, obviously, which is in what we call a sort of civic center campus, which has its own sort of character. And last but not least, what we're calling the Walnut Road Residential in this lighter color, which is sort of representative of also single-family residential, but slightly bigger lots and bigger front yards. So this is, again, this is our first pass at sort of starting a conversation with you about understanding what the patterns are. This is the first step in creating a form-based code that is responsive to those patterns, either by preserving them or through identifying where they should evolve or change or grow. And we're gonna enter a little bit of an engagement, some polling here right now. So I'll go into detail on each one of these, and I will ask you all if we have it right or wrong, or if there's other things you want to add to it. Railroad Ave is a very precious, beautiful, sort of old-fashioned village street. What we're seeing are smaller buildings, closer to each other, closer to the sidewalk to create a nice continuous pattern. We see actually quite a variety in the building forms, although when you are on the street, they don't seem as varied as they're appearing here because, again, they're sort of holding the sidewalk very carefully for the most part, but we see everything from 1 story to 1.5 to 2-story buildings. And what we've done also is to assign some, we call them, like what we think the range of existing dimensions really are. And so we're seeing parcels that are anywhere from 25 to 75 feet, depths from 50 to 100, very shallow setbacks in the front, and sometimes very little or no side yards. And so these are sort of typical patterns that we're seeing, and we're trying to, in a sense, document dimensionally some of the range that we're seeing there. Okay, so Zoe's going to lead us through a poll question.
Great. Okay, so if you don't mind pulling your phone back up, if you still have the same window open, it should now show you this question. If you've lost that screen, you can find it again either by scanning the QR code that you see here or by joining at slido.com with that ID number. So I'm going to give you all some time to kind of both understand the question and respond to it. You can see kind of in the right, we already have 17 people that have submitted. So this is really what we're trying to get at here is we want to understand from your perspective, how are we doing in understanding the pattern of Railroad Ave commercial? Have we captured that pattern of development well? And this is kind of a rating question, so we're looking at kind of a temperature check. How far off are we? Are we pretty close or are we way far off? A few minutes for folks to get through it. This is kind of a way to signal to us, how much more homework we have to do to get it right, so that we're responding to an accurate understanding of your existing town center and the different sub-districts within it. So none of this is a proposal. We are not at that point. We are just trying to accurately understand and document the current conditions and what's distinctive about them. Okay, we have pretty good participation, so I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next one. So overall, we're doing pretty good. We're in that kind of, we're not quite at the, love eyes, but that's okay, we can work on that. So this is encouraging, but it looks like we still have some room to improve. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one, which is to understand basically how can we close that gap? Like what else are we missing that is important about this this town, this part of your town center? And this is something we're going to, in the conversation for the second part of the meeting, we'll talk through this in a more flexible way, but we wanted to kind of get a first start. So if there's anything that comes to mind immediately, you can type it in. And then we also, like I mentioned, we'll have sticky notes that you can add similar, you might need a little bit more time to think about what's the thing that's missing. So no worries if it doesn't come to mind immediately. With a few more minutes, we got a bunch of people who are mid-typing. I'll restate that question so folks can understand. So, and let me know if I'm not getting it quite right. So I think the question was, in documenting and reflecting these patterns on Railroad Ave, are we thinking about these as patterns that we want to expand or introduce elsewhere, or are we just trying to understand and suggest what might make sense in Railroad Ave? Is that an accurate summary? Not quite. Yeah, so to respond to answer that question, this is not a suggestion that the rest of your town center should look like Railroad Ave unless you all tell us that's what you want. Our assumption is that there's something special about Railroad Ave, you want to hold on to that, you want to make sure that that's something that continues, and that any future development fits in. But we're not assuming that that's what you want elsewhere as well at this point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I see there's a couple of people typing, but I'll just mention she was calling attention to the height as something. We want to make sure that we don't see 3 stories, for instance, as something. So just to point out, the current zoning does allow 3 stories. So this is something this is one of the things that's somewhat urgent or important about this exercise. Apart from all the other concerns swirling around it, is your current zoning doesn't necessarily help you get what you like and care about your town center now. Yeah, go ahead.
Does this just inform what happens in the future, or once the form-based code is adopted in town, are businesses supposed to apply retroactively and make the businesses close?
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is something that comes up a lot with zoning. I think there was a variant on this question before. So zoning doesn't apply retroactively. So if you have a building that has a certain character, a certain size, a certain pattern, you are almost always, allowed to continue with no alterations. The only time that new zoning starts to matter, if you're an existing building or property owner, is if you're making a massive gut renovation to the point where you begin to trigger all of those same approvals. So if you're doing like an incremental addition, it's not going to have a lot of impact. If you're talking about a complete overhaul, it would. But for the vast majority of people, it won't affect you in that way. It'll only affect properties that want to pursue a big change. Yeah. So this is great. We're getting the beginnings of some things that we should be capturing more completely in our documentation. I'll come to you in just a moment. Around trees, parking, variety, flower sidewalks. So a lot of things related to public realm, which is the term we use to talk about the space that's both public and private, that's in front of buildings and properties. I'm going to go ahead and jump to, I think we have a couple more people typing, so while people are typing, why don't you go ahead?
Is there any way that we can see the entire presentation? We're asking very specifically the downtown area.
we don't see what you're presenting for the whole thing. I don't know how I personally can answer this question for a very specific area.
We will, at the end of this, have some questions about the relationship of the different pattern sub-areas. I think I understand what you're asking for. It's kind of a chicken or the egg. We need to get into some level of detail. We don't have a proposal for the overall. We're gonna ask that from you. So we can't, in order to be able to have that conversation, we have to get to some level of detail to see how this is resonating.
You had a map, I don't think
No, those are the, yeah, the map that we showed as a starting point for this exercise is our understanding, our interpretation of what the patterns are in your downtown currently. It is not related to the zoning that governs what can happen on those properties now. Yeah, for each of the areas, we're going to go through the same exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Apologies for those of you that may still be typing. We just need to keep moving so that we don't keep you here too late. So that'll... Correct. Yeah, we don't have a proposal. That's why we're trying to break this down into a scale that we can get meaningful input so it's not overwhelming all at once, and we're trying to start from you. Correct. Yeah, I think it's hard to be patient when the end result is, yeah, the question was just pointing out that we're trying to take it step by step. We're not showing you a big picture vision or proposal because we haven't gotten there yet. We don't have that. So I know it's hard to be patient given all of the things that are, all of the big issues that are swirling around this, but we really have to talk about this at this level of detail in order to get to a point where we can even understand how this relates to those other issues. Yeah, I'm going to briefly go back to that. I'm not going to speak to it at length, but just so that everybody knows, this is the structure we're going through. So we're each of these color zones, we are talking about those individually with you. So based on our interpretation, this is where we think these boundaries, these transitions between different patterns occur, and we're trying to understand if within each of these areas we're accurately understanding what the pattern is right now. Yes, the feedback that we get tonight is the thing that we are using to begin the next step. It will inform how we approach this going forward, and without that input, we're stuck with just our analysis, which we know is not sufficient. So we need to get input from you all to do this right. Yeah, without the community input, it would be us just going for it based on our best professional judgment, which is never the right way to do something. You know your community better than we ever will, and we want to make sure that we're understanding it as well as we possibly can in the time we have, so that we're giving you something that's relevant and useful and that matches the character of your community. And we can't do that if we don't hear from you about the patterns. Okay.
Okay, so thank you for staying with us here. We're going to cycle through each one of those areas very quickly to ask you, did we get it right? Are we characterizing in the right way? Are there things that you'd like to preserve or enhance, or other things you want to see in those areas? The second area we call Bay Road Commercial. It's characterized by that sort of area that's just to the east on Bay Road of the railroad tracks. And I think the predominant sort of feature a little bit are, 2.5-story, more like residential structures that through time have begun to absorb commercial uses. So you see signage out front. There's a few other dedicated commercial uses. What we're also seeing in this area are lots that are pretty deep, and so you see sort of other kinds of structures that have emerged in the back. This is the nice sort of coffee shop in the back. Anyway, these are some of the sort of characteristics that we're seeing here. And again, we've elected to just, so we have our facts straight, to understand dimensionally what we're seeing on the ground here. And so these are much larger lots, somewhere between 75 feet wide and 125 feet deep. Again, we see very commonly there's quite a bit of parking to serve some of those commercial uses. And again, deep lots that have allowed for different kinds of structures to be built towards the rear over time. Again, this is our sort of collecting data, if you will, to understand what exists, and then to hear feedback from you whether those observations are correct, and also further what kinds of things that you may want to see in these locations.
Right, so same deal with this one. These are all going to have the same 2 questions, but relative to each of the sub areas that we're talking about. So for this one, for the Bay Road commercial sub area, we want to understand the same thing. How did we do? How close are we capturing that pattern of development? And then we'll follow up by asking you about, what do you think we might have missed? So we'll give people some time for this. Looks like we've got a good, strong response so far, about 35 people. We have a few more minutes to get into the upper 40s. Okay. Since we're running a bit short on time, I'm going to go ahead and advance that so you can see how we did. So about the same. So we're getting most of it, but there's still things that are missing. So with that in mind, what are we missing? What other features about this area are important that we should be understanding and reflecting and building on going forward? Okay, yeah, go ahead. This is a good time for questions while people are typing. Sorry, one second. We have 2 of you asking questions. So we get up the yellow shirt in the front and then in the back. Go ahead. Okay, so the question is, are we talking about commercially developing the town and 3A? Okay, so first, there's also a question of whether we're developers. We are not developers. We are planners and architects, so we deal with regulations, and occasionally we will design buildings for other people, but we never develop buildings. The second piece about 3A and commercial development. So this is, if we come up with a zoning code together that goes to town meeting, and at that town meeting, collectively, you choose to adopt that zoning, which is all those things are big ifs. If we get to that point and the zoning is implemented, it would govern what can and cannot happen, but it would not require development. 3A also does not require development. 3A is only about zoning. So it's only about the rules for development, it's not about the development itself, which is, I know, a subtle distinction that isn't very satisfying, but none of this actually requires or triggers development. It just changes the rules for development, and that might change people's behavior. That might make people make different choices because they have new opportunities. So there is real change that's associated with these choices, but it does not fundamentally require anything new to happen.
The state has said that each town in the 177 must build a certain number of units.
That is I'm going to restate that. I'm going to restate what you said. So a woman in the audience has just said that the state has required each town that's in this to build a certain number of units.
Open to developers.
Okay, that require a certain number of units to be built.
Yes.
That is a very common, inaccurate understanding. It is requiring zoning. That is it. There is no requirement for building, it is just zoning.
why change it?
Because the question is, why would they want to change zoning? I'm going to do this so everybody can see. If everybody can be quiet for a moment, I will explain an answer to that. Why would the state want communities to change their zoning? Right now, zoning is one of the biggest barriers to any kind of housing development in the entirety of the state. And so yes, if you change zoning, people may respond differently. They probably will respond differently. But the state requirement is not about that response. It does not require that response. They would like to see that response, but it does not have any direct requirement for that response. It is only about the zoning because that is such a big barrier.
In our town, if you public lot, large school, the town is planning to build houses. Demolish.
Any town-owned, so there was a comment about the town-owned school site being a place where there is an active interest in development. That may be true. However, any town-owned land, in addition to zoning, has to go through a town vote to even be available to developers. And all of that would be addressed at that time separately with very specific requirements.
And they're unable to do that.
The current zoning, we haven't looked at that closely because it hasn't been the focus so far, but the zoning is not designed for the kind of thing that people have been discussing or considering for that site. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving. The next question cycle where we're doing polling, I'll take some more questions. And sorry to the gentleman in the back, I know that we'll get to you. Okay. So for this one, we saw that there's some of the things we missed, included traffic, commercial, trees, railroad, parking. So again, a lot of things that are not so much about the development on the parcels themselves, but about the relationship to the street and the activities there and the other infrastructure nearby. So that's important for us to understand that that's really part of what people are noticing about the specific character of these different areas. And I'm just going to make note that we are running over time from what we allocated for this, given that we had so many questions, which was not our intended format. Again, we understand that was what was needed. We can either keep proceeding through this in a more structured way, or we can transition more quickly to the portion of the meeting where we are not in this relationship and we're all talking in the rear of the room in a discussion format. My inclination is to do that sooner rather than later. We do have this and one other pattern sub-area that we've gone into this level of detail on. So I'd like to get through the polling questions for those two sites, and then I'd like to break so that we can all have more informal discussions together and address specific questions you may have in the time that we have remaining. So I hope that others feel similarly, and I'll pass it back to you to take these last two.
Thank you for staying with us. The next sort of character area generally we're calling downtown residential. It's the single-family residential that's west of the tracks, and I think it's pretty consistently characterized by slightly smaller lots. In some cases, more informal arrangements of older houses with some garages or small sort of barn attachments. There is generally kind of a higher lot coverage because the lots are smaller, but again, it has a sort of what I would say is more of a village character to its density. And here's just a kind of a little bit of some of our qualitative observations about what we're seeing in terms of the architecture, in terms of what's going on in the front yard. Sometimes the buildings are similar, sometimes one is different from the other. But we're seeing a slightly more maybe modest scale of dwelling and a slightly tighter relationship to the street as some of these parcels are a little bit smaller. So we're seeing parcel widths, anywhere from 50 to 100 feet. This is maybe an example of a typical sort of smaller one with a garage in the back. There are obviously slightly bigger ones, again, with some open space in the rear and maybe some that are even bigger, but we're seeing sort of a variety that tend to be a little bit more compact than the Walnut Road area. So I will move on. Again, ask you to poll on this one. Did we describe it correctly? Move on to the next question. It should be prompted right now. I see some answers rolling in. That's good. And we're going to answer questions at the end. Okay.
Sorry, probably didn't have the mic. We are in the kind of upper 40s, so, or lower 40s, so I wanted to go ahead and keep us moving. So in this case, we were starting to get closer, so slightly higher score than we had for the other ones, but same general idea. Mostly on track, but still needs some fine tuning. So this next one is about what we're missing. So for the downtown residential sub-area, what features did we miss? Quite a few people typing, but I'm going to go ahead and advance. You can keep typing and submit it. It won't block you, but you can start to see some of the things that have come up. I'm interested in us doing more work around sidewalks, acknowledging churches as part of this pattern, looking at how walkable it is, and septic issues that we talked about before, children, families, a bunch of other things that are kind of in smaller text here. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, I think, in the interest of time.
Okay, Walnut Road Residential. This is the residential area that is west of Bay Road. Again, we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a distinct residential neighborhood from the downtown portion because the parcels tend to be bigger. The houses tend to be set back a little bit further. The lots, again, are slightly larger. You can see from some of these sampling images, much more generous front yards, much more generous side yards, a more traditional suburban / rural pattern, less like a kind of type village sort of pattern. Again, some of these lots are quite large, so some of these are actually meeting that 20,000 square foot minimum. It's probably based around that, but 100 to 200 feet deep. And again, lots big enough to support buildings that are 2.5 stories with garages that are either attached or even sometimes sort of separate. But generally, again, larger lots, bigger houses, bigger front yards, bigger setbacks. And I'll quickly ask you if that sounds about right. I think 41 is our magic number. All right, pretty good. Our best one yet. I guess we're getting warm. And I will move on to the next one again, which is what are other important features or aspects of this neighborhood maybe that we haven't captured or just are important to you in terms of that describe its existing character?
I live on Walnut Road.
To the expert.
And it's beautiful. A lot of land and a lot of animals on the land. Deer, raccoons. There's a wild bird that goes through all.
I hope you're putting your answers down. Okay. I'm gonna, again, keep us moving.
So I think this will be our last one. So maybe we can keep going with the other goals, but I think for time. So we have about 30 minutes remaining. I'm going to leave this open so people can keep responding. A lot of the questions that we've had up for the polls are kind of replicated in certain ways on the boards behind us. So please, if there's one that you wanted to talk to us about more, please come find us at the board that matches that that sub-area. So just to give you a general sense of it, and apologies for the virtual folks, we'll kick you off in a moment. On the far right, if you turn around and look towards the rear of the room, on the far right is the overall map of the that half mile from the town center commuter rail station. On that, what we really want to hear from you about is how do you define the boundary of your town center? We know we've been using this half mile as a starting point, but we know that that's not an accurate representation of what your town center is, so help us understand where you think the boundary is. The handouts that you may have collected as you were coming in, that's what that's for. So we want you to draw on that and then give it back to us so that we can see where you think the boundary is. There's also room for sticky notes to add to that board. The next one to the left from there is the Railroad Ave commercial. If folks could just keep the chatter down a little bit longer so that everybody can hear the instructions, that'd be great. So Railroad Ave commercial, we want to know what did we miss. We want to have conversations with you about that. For Bay Road commercial, same thing. We have all this information there. We want to hear from you about what we've missed. And then the downtown residential and the Walnut Road residential, same thing. And then lastly, we also have the Crossroads and Cumberland Farms area and the Willow Street Industrial Services area, which we didn't get a chance to speak with you about in the polling setting. So if you want to talk to us about those, please find us at that board. We want to understand, your thoughts on that and if you consider those to be part of the town center. So with that, I think I will break. And folks can go ahead and transition to the rear of the room. I'm going to need a few minutes just to close out the virtual setting, and please come to us with any questions that you didn't get answered in this format. Appreciate your patience with us, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any remaining questions you have in that setting. Thanks, everyone.